Good morning, everyone. This is John Jackson with Encore Group. I want to welcome you to our webinar on building a technology roadmap for your organization. We are going to be looking at our using Primavera P6 today and establishing a roadmap and how you can, as an organization, optimize your Primavera P6 software. And so we're glad you're attending today. The webinar will probably take between 30 and 40 minutes, and then we will have some time for questions afterwards. And so if you would just feel free to enter a question in the question box. Because of the number of people here, we will have questions that you can ask, but if you would use your question box, that would be helpful. And then we can address those accordingly. We're going to move right into the webinar. I want just to give you a brief background of my experience in Primavera P6. I've been a Primavera consultant for nearly 25 years. I was actually a software developer back in the mid-'80s, developing scheduling software, and ended up in the field testing it, and became a scheduler by trade as a consultant, but also helping organize and implement scheduling procedures and developing best practices for many different types of organizations, from owners and developers to construction contractors, manufacturers, and different energy type of implementation. So I have a long history in doing this, and I have learned a lot. Unfortunately, I've learned a lot from some of my mistakes that I've made. So we're going to go over just some of those things today, some of the lessons that I've learned, and some of the things that you can, as an organization, begin thinking about as you look at implementing your Primavera P6. One of the first things I wanted to let you know, and some of you may have already experienced this, over the last few years, I've seen organizations spend millions of dollars trying to put systems in place to meet different challenges and try to bring some type of control to their organization, their projections, their cost, their schedule. Unfortunately, most of these systems never meet the expectations. Organizations buy software and they only use limited features, and the standardization is seldom what is expected. But the truth is that 75 to 90% of system implementations fail. I've done quite a bit of research over the years on what makes system implementations fail, what makes them successful, and it is amazing how many of them fail. That's a lot of risk. If you think of 75 to 90% of implementations fail based on the end user, that's a lot of risk for an organization. I wish I could say that none of mine had never failed, but I've been doing this for a long time, and although I've had successes, I can look back and see where I went wrong on some of the implementations. So we're going to just go through a couple of these scenarios, or a few of these different scenarios, and implementation strategies that, if you are not careful as an organization, you can fall into some of these strategies and they typically fail. Number one, first strategy I call the Big Bang strategy. That means all lines, all states, all systems on in day one. That's trying to implement a full and complete system from scratch immediately without actually working through a plan or even a phased approach to doing it. So that's one implementation failing strategy. Another one, I call it the engagement strategy. That's when an organization tries it but never really makes the commitment. They put their toe in the water, but the decision maker or decision makers never really pull the trigger and commit to it going forward. That's a failing strategy. The other one is what I call the internal expert strategy, and that's a failure to get assistance from the outside, someone that truly has expertise to help you walk through that process, trying to figure it out on your own. Another strategy is what I call the out of control strategy, or lack of controls in your implementation. In other words, not taking time to set up proper controls for your implementation. An implementation is a project, right? And it should make sense that since most of us are in the project business, we could understand the importance of schedule and documentation and planning and then tracking with controls. But you'd be surprised how many implementations are literally out of control, completely out of control. Actually, you might be surprised at how many project controls implementations are out of control. That's what's funny, because most of my implementations over the years have been with project controls software, and or I've gone in and worked with organizations who have implemented project controls software, and come to find out during the implementation and the management of that implementation, they had no controls in place to see and to guarantee, or at least to minimize the risk of that implementation. So you'd be surprised how many scheduling implementations are not scheduled, right? Another implementation strategy, this is what I call the bling bling strategy. This is a photo here of Slick Rick Bling, and this is a feature implementation. This is when an organization buys and tries to implement functions that they really don't need, or way ahead of the time where they have the adequate information to even implement the features that they're wanting to feature. This happens a lot of times after a software salesperson sells a lot of features, and they try to implement them right away without the historical growth in your implementation to actually utilize the features, and they end up being in the failed category. Most of the features are usually sold, and users abandon everything but the basics. And how many times have you heard, we don't use 90% of the features, right? But that's what you bought. Another implementation fail strategy is the thermometer strategy. And this is a strategy that has no success measurements. You never know if you ever made it or not. You never know if your implementation was successful or not. And then there is another feature I call the conflict strategy. This is when an organization doesn't realize, or at least forgets, the different success goals of the parties involved in an implementation. While an organization has one set of goals, a software salesperson or a consultant has another set of goals. So defining what your goals are within your organization and establishing those goals as your priorities. Then your consultant that you hire or a software salesperson may be able to assist you with adding some additional goals, but the key as an organization is to really determine what your goals are, and then make sure that the software, the salesperson, and the consultant helps you meet your goals first, and the goals do not become conflictual. Then the last one. This is the sink or swim model. This is what this is the implementation where there's no buy-in from the top, or maybe there's no buy-in from the IT department, or there's no buy-in at the executive level, and an implementation is delegated with no real leadership. An implementation is approached with no decision-making capabilities, and so it ends up being the sink or swim model. These are some of the failing strategies that I've seen, and I've actually been a part of some of these strategies, been on staff in an implementation team for some of these. But if you really take, we're going to talk today about just basic steps. It's not, none of this is rocket science. In fact, it's very common sense when you sit back and look at it. You can avoid most of these failing strategies simply by putting a good roadmap together. The key to a successful technology implementation is a good roadmap. When I was young, I remember my family, we would always go on a family vacation in our station wagon, and my parents would try to keep us occupied by sending a map over from the front seat, sending it back to us in the back seat, so we could try to figure out where we were going, looking up all the different stops, and you could actually measure, if you remember. Some of you may not be old enough, but you might remember in the old maps they used to have the little red numbers that showed you how many miles were between one intersection and the next, and you could actually calculate your progress as you moved forward. Opportunity. Okay, I understand we lost a little audio there for a few minutes. I wanted to go back and talk about the building a successful roadmap. I'm not sure where we lost the audio, but once again, going back to using a map. The old days we had maps where we actually had to measure our progress from one location to the next, and if we were lost or whatever, we could always do a calculation on what it would take to get back on track to get to our final destination. And that's the point of building a good roadmap for your software implementation. Having the proper milestones in place to determine whether or not you are meeting your goals, whether or not you are still on track to ultimately have the final product that you have decided to implement. So those are very important. Having a good roadmap is the first thing that you want to do, getting that place. Now, of course, a good roadmap is always going to require some flexibility, because just like any project, I know I spend a lot of time on construction projects, but I haven't been on any project that doesn't require some kind of changing flexibilities. Most projects you get into it, and within the first week you have changes, you have different directions, different issues that come up that require slight modifications to make sure that everything works appropriately. So that's one of the keys to having a good roadmap, so that you can measure and you can analyze issues that come up so that you can make the appropriate adjustments to meet your end objective in your implementation. So fortunately for us, in this group today, we are actually implementing, and we're discussing building a roadmap to implement the best roadmap software in the industry. I've worked with a lot of scheduling programs over the years, and Primavera P6 is definitely the best roadmap software. You can take a 1,000, 5,000 task roadmap to build a construction project, to put out a new product in a manufacturing environment, or a research and development environment, or deploying a new oil field setup. Those are the types of things that we do in this business, is build roadmaps for different types of projects. So here we are discussing building a roadmap to implement the best roadmap software in the industry. Primavera P6 is the most proficient tool for projecting into the future. And so it will allow your organization to see that roadmap in the future, to see where you want to go and how you want to get there. Now, fortunately, and I'm not sure about your organizations, but a lot of the organizations that I deal with have already made a significant investment. They already have an investment in the Primavera P6 tools and have the license available to begin a good implementation. In fact, if you, in my opinion, a lot of the roadmaps that we do doesn't require a lot of software acquisition at the very beginning. So you can start with a few licenses to help get that roadmap analyzed and developed, start looking at some of the goals that you want to have. So a lot of times it doesn't even take a large upfront investment. So building your implementation is it's important to look at your process as well as the technology. It's not just enough to have the software. A lot of our clients have software on the shelf, but they've never really put together the process to really make that software deliver what they expected when they purchased it. we live in a culture, and we work in a culture where technology is changing so fast. If you're not careful, your implementation will be outdated before it's done. So what you want to do is build your implementation around processes. Then you can adjust to new technologies. This is one of the first key steps in just getting a good implementation together. Developing good processes, and then you can adjust your technology. I can give you several examples of implementations that have been built on technology without good processes, and they failed. For example, I remember I had one of the first Palm Pilots built into a phone. It was awesome. You know, the possibilities I was thinking. And in fact, I actually was involved in an organization, one of the big DOTs, one of the state DOTs, that was implementing a Palm Pilot program. And I remember one of my first client implementations on the Palm Pilot. And it was definitely a technology implementation. In fact, the technology is no longer even around anymore. But if the implementation was built on the process, you can easily switch your technology to make that match. And so that's something that an organization needs to really look at. So it's not so much going out and buying a lot of software up front. The first thing is to define your processes. What do you want? What are your ultimate goals and success criteria? So your technology will fit. Process implementation builds the process, then rolls out that process on a technology platform. So when technology changes, the process adjusts, and probably will have to adjust a bit, but it doesn't require a whole new implementation. A technology implementation can be somewhat rigid, while a process implementation has flexibility to adjust to technology. So if you build a technology program around a technology alone, you'll find yourself in a jam with each new upgrade or each new release of software. So that's one of the first things that we want to check. Let me show you. Here are some 5 basic stages to a successful implementation. Now you can go, you can find different implementation strategies that have 3 stages, 4 stages. Some of them I've seen up to 10 stages. But these are the 5 basic stages that you should employ when you start putting your implementation together, your implementation strategy or your roadmap. For my simple mind, it helps me to remember them by starting them all with a D. Okay? So where you have sometimes you'll have 10 stages in an implementation, but in most cases that I've seen, those 10 stages, you could really group them into these 5 basic ones. The first one is the define stage. This is one of the most important stages where an organization defines goals, success standards, and key performance indicators that will drive an implementation if it's successful. The next one is the discovery phase. This stage is all about introspection into an organization. You're mostly answering questions about yourself, like what is broken, what's working, or what can we do better. You might be surprised what a good set of questions asked in different parts of an organization will reveal. The next stage is the design stage, in which the system implementation is fleshed out with a detailed plan to accomplish the goals that you've set. This planning stage is critical. In fact, once a good plan is in place, all you have to worry about is executing that plan, or what we call developing the system. Now, the first priority is building from the design a step-by-step development of your system design criteria. And this stage usually includes the processes documentation, software setup and configuration, hardware, any of those types of issues. And then finally, once you're developed, then you deploy it. And this is the rollout with training. And so these 5 stages, you'll see a plan with more or less stages of how an implementation is organized. And you may see 2 of these combined or 1 of these broken out into multiple stages. But however they're organized, these 5 at least should be identified in your implementation plan somewhere. And one of the difficulties is not skipping one. No matter how short that stage may be, you want to at least walk through each one of these stages. So the first one, as we saw in the first step, is defining what you want to get out of your technology implementation. And what you're defining is your success. You know, what would we determine as would be a successful implementation? This step is one of the most important, and it's one of the most often overlooked, but yet at the same time it provides the best return on investment in any implementation. As an organization, no matter how small or how large, clearly defined goals and success strategies are essential. And in my opinion, this is the most important strategy. Some organizations start to deploy technology before they've established definable goals. I call this the baby step approach. Start with thinking about where you want your organization to be in 5 years or 3 years, right? So that decisions you make today start that process of accomplishing your 5-year goal or your 3-year goal. This, a lot of times this strategy doesn't even, or this stage doesn't even cost any money. I know organizations who have, they don't have budgets to implement a lot of software. Well, they're thinking in their mind, they're thinking we don't have the budget to buy software and spend a lot of time on implementation costs. But this first phase, this defining your success criteria, is a very simple stage to accomplish with no budget money or very limited budget money. Really just taking the time as an organization to sit down with your executives and the participants, the major stakeholders, and say, hey, where do we as an organization want to be in a year? What are the goals that we would like to have accomplished? What would we like to get out of this software? Why did we purchase it in the first place? Or which direction are we going? Defining that, this is where you want to identify your potential return on investment. You know, explain, increase your efficiency, decreasing the cost of disputes, enterprise, you know, goodwill, being able to communicate, managing your resources, all those kind of things. And this is a rough draft of what I call success criteria, right? This stage, these details may change as the implementation moves forward, but your organization's definition of success should rarely change. You might notice that we haven't talked about any technology here. Where organizations fail so often in implementations is not just determining or putting in writing for themselves a clear definition of success before they determine what technology will help them get there. Ideally, this should be done before any RFP or any quotes for technology are requested. One reason why so many implementations fail is that an RFP is issued, software salespeople are put in a position to determine your success criteria for you. So every implementation will have bumps and glitches, just like any project, but with a clearly defined success strategy, an organization and their consultants, if they have them, can regain focus. So take the time to document what you want. For example, you know, from a P6 standpoint, you know, really identifying as with an executive team. Most executive teams in organizations that I'm aware of are not even aware what tools they have available. The ability to be able to look at all of your projects in one location from a P6 standpoint. Being able to allow you to look into the future. You know, an accounting system is really good at documenting transactions and building a good history, financial history of where your organization is. But P6 is the best tool that I know of to be able to look into the future. Actually take your projects that are scheduled out 2 weeks, or 2 years, 3 years, and sometimes even budgeted items that are going to be out multiple years, being able to look into the future and see exactly how these things are lined up. You can obviously being able to put cash associated with projects, being able to put resources associated with projects starts to bring a lot of opportunities for your P6 implementation. So one of the success criteria might be we want to, as an organization, be able to manage our expected cash flow across all of our projects, being able to cost load, set up a standard where you cost load your schedules so that as an organization now you can see across your entire enterprise and see what your cash flow looks like. Or maybe it's a resource allocation. Maybe you have your management team, or maybe you have your particular equipment or particular purchasing that's going to require certain resource allocation that you want to be able to look in the future and say, okay, we're going to need to be hiring in 6 months, or we can schedule some maintenance for our equipment 3 months from now because of certain events that have been scheduled to take place in the future. P6 allows you through your to accomplish your resource allocation, your resource planning, your cash flow planning. There's all sorts of dashboards that you may want to implement. There's the web browser interface. I mean, you guys have probably seen most of these before if you've ever sat in a Primavera P6. There's the multiple projects and dashboards. So now that executives don't have to know how to actually work P6, they can actually log in, being able to see information across all their enterprise just using these dashboards, and being able to look at like different departments in their organization at a time. Being able to do all of these things, these are the kind of things that an organization can just sit down and say, okay, this is what we would like to be able to do in 5 years. In 5 years from now or 3 years from now, we would like to have our system so well refined that we can start looking into the future, managing our cash flow, managing our budgets, looking at our resources, how we're going to do that, and looking at potential risk on projects, all types of functionality that you may want to implement that you can't do it probably in 6 months. You probably don't have enough data to do it in 6 months. You probably don't have the consistent procedures that are going to give you the data to accomplish that in 6 months. But 2 years is very realistic, and certainly further out from that. So the next phase, once you've defined your success criteria and sat through that and looked at that success criteria, the next step is to go through the discovery phase. In this discovery phase, I have a standard interview model, and it follows a general format. What is your pain, right? Where do you hurt? It's like going to the doctor. In these questions, we look at what's not working and where the pain is coming from. Basically, as a consultant, this section answers, why am I here? If an organization is not having pain, don't change anything. If it works, don't fix it, they say. So we look at a series of questions to determine what may be causing the pain. I call these an organization's vital signs. And then these questions start with an inventory of organizational habits, existing processes, procedures, budget, staff, technology, reporting, all the things that you're currently doing to function. You can learn about the organization enough to form a baseline for what is possible. And that's what we call the assessment. Now, if you notice, as I mentioned, this is kind of looking like a doctor's visit. But lastly, an organization identifies what would make them feel better, or what would make them feel healthy. What would they wish for if they could get it? These are good health check questions that you want to go through. Once again, this is that discovery phase, right? And this has to work within your organization at different levels. What would your people on the front lines need? What do your executives need? And so, as a result, these are compared to your success criteria from the previous stage to make sure that these are defined in your success criteria so that you can move forward and you can keep track with your roadmap. Now that third step, the third stage that we talked about is the development stage, or the stage where you actually make your plan and you go about building a to-do list for your implementation. And most of you may know that I'm somewhat of a scheduling geek. I schedule everything, and I think everyone should do the same. But a good implementation, just like a good construction or product development schedule, will provide the roadmap for resource planning, when a consultant will be needed, when your own staff can be utilized, when software needs to be purchased, what software needs to be purchased. And I've seen so many organizations get to this point in implementation, and they realize they purchased too many licenses of a product, or they purchased the wrong license of a product, or they wish they had taken a different approach in their procurement process. But once again, the implementation should focus on the process of getting there before the technology. But this is where you can clearly define your roadmap and really finalize. Once you've defined your success criteria, you have gone through the process of discovery. Now you put your plan together. And this is where the fun begins. Once that's done, you can start building your program. This is where many implementations lose control, because up to this point, it's been all honeymoon with all the excitement about new plans and the new system. But now the heavy lifting begins, and production has to start. From day one, the plan has to be monitored. We're talking about scheduling implementations, but how can we plan and monitor our jobs better? So we put procedures in place to determine how well our projects are planned, how well the project stakeholders are executing the plan, how to identify problems early and resolve them, right? So why not use the tools we're trying to put in place to put them in place? So we may find what works and what doesn't early on. But this is the key components in a good implementation. During this phase, as the development's taken place, as the implementation team is putting all their stuff together, you've defined it, you've discovered it, you've designed your implementation. This is where the hard work begins, and this is that development stage, right? This is where, in a good implementation, making sure your roadmap is you're still on on the way to a successful implementation. The key components when you're putting all of this stuff together is good progress meetings, just like with any project. You want to have good schedule updates. You want to have meeting and discussion minutes, a good documentation system in place to make sure your implementation is heading in the right direction. And then if it does change direction, which they do, you'll have good documentation in place to see why they changed, when they changed, and what the change was. So this is very important. Lastly, this stage is the deployment stage, or this is where you actually roll out the plan. This stage will usually include training, pilot projects, maintenance of the plan, and this is where flexibility is required to make necessary adjustments to the plan to keep it working. This stage is where most conflicts occur, right? So you have to be ready for it. This is when you're going out to the front lines and you're training your people who are going to be using the system. But once again, this is where the commitment comes in. So as you move through this phase, a constant review of your success criteria will help keep your organization focused. And I'll usually make a review of this criteria part of the weekly progress review. But this is where the success starts to pay off. This phase is where your return on investment is achieved and where a process could be easily adapted to new technologies as technology is available. So those are your 5 key areas for your roadmap for a successful implementation. We had the the definition, defining your success criteria, discovery, finding, that's your checkup phase, then doing the design of your system, developing that system, following that design, the plan you put in place, and then rolling it out. So here are some implementation challenges, and I'm just going to I'm going to run through these pretty quick, but understand the challenges that you're going to face in your organization. These are some of the basic ones that I come across in my day-to-day interaction with clients. Number one, understanding the technology. It is, for many, it's surprisingly, many of my clients and organizations that I've worked with over the years have been so accustomed to utilizing planning and project management tools that were developed in the 90s, and they're still in that 90s mind frame. Another one is the paradigm conversion, going from standalone to an enterprise system. Many organizations are still using, they're Primavera users, but they're still using P3 or SureTrack. And even some of the organizations that I work with are using P6. but they're using it like a SureTrack or P3, where they're on standalone versions. But going to an enterprise, you have to really focus on how your data is getting in there, how it's going to impact other people in the enterprise. Another challenge is developing corporate standards. You'll have to standardize the way you do certain things in order, since you are in an enterprise system. Those corporate standards become more and more important, especially if you want to be able to get good dashboards and good reports out. You'll have to have standardized procedures. And then rethinking your processes and then training those new processes. That's always a challenge that you will have to deal with. The benefits that will come out of this, and here's a long list, but I'll give these to you real quick. You come out of it with a standardized process for your organization that it'll change the way your organization is able to manage if you have standardized processes. Being able to manage cash flow, resource, we talked about that. You'll have dynamic and consistent projects for the projects that you are internally trying to manage. You'll have consistent tracking and analysis, good risk management, good executive involvement. You know, most of my career, executives really never know what's going on down at the project level. But a good enterprise system allows you to have that executive oversight and identify problems early. Enterprise reports and metrics, issue identification, and resolution. Here are some essentials. I'm just giving you some of these. We'll send you a handout of this and you can look through these. But understand the value of the enterprise system. As an organization or your executive team, you'll have to have a buy-in to be able to make that work. The essentials are enterprise collaboration. In that planning process, in your roadmap process, you'll have to get involvement from different parts of your organization to make it work. And then that commitment will help bring that roadmap to a successful conclusion, right? Reach the goal that you're looking for. Where consultants can help, roadmap development. If you need some help getting putting a good roadmap in place, I recommend getting some outside help. Third parties can often, in that roadmap development, help you structure. I find a lot of executives have an ideal in the back of their mind, what they wish they could do. Even in myself, as an organizational manager, I have an ideal of what I would like to be able to do. A good consultant, though, can help you put those down and organize those ideals, those success criteria, and put them in place. You might need some help on your hardware technology, software customization, procedure development, training, and then maybe some customizations that you want to have. Okay? Here are some ROIs, and this is our last slide here, some ROIs, return on investments, for a good roadmap. It's duration management, being able to accomplish your projects in a timely way. Most organizations, projects are delayed. That's just the bottom line. All kinds, from internal projects to all kinds of projects that you're working on. So duration management, efficiency management is key. Then your resource management, being able to manage resources better. By putting a good implementation together, you can save a lot of money managing your resources. And then risk management is another one. And then early dispute or early problem resolutions. And then scheduling overhead flexibility. So these are the types of ROIs that you can get out of a good implementation. I appreciate all of you attending today. I'm going to go ahead and close out the webinar. If you have questions, feel free to send me some questions, and we can address those individually with you. And I hope that you have received a benefit from attending our webinar today. Thank you again for attending.